Well, if you're visiting with us, we are making our way through the book of Genesis, passage by passage, and we're going to try to tackle two whole chapters today, 40 and 41. So we're going to begin our time at the beginning of chapter 40. And as you kind of make your way back there, I want to ask, have you ever wondered whether God has forgotten you? Has it ever come into your mind? And of course, we know what we don't mean is God has amnesia and God literally forgot my name. Your theology is too good for that. But have you felt forgotten by God? Maybe you've been in a long season of waiting, years perhaps of prayers in which God is not answering yes. It's just a constant no. Prayers for healing in your body, prayers for a spouse, prayers for a job, prayers for children, prayers for clarity on my situation. It feels so unclear. And the silence from the Lord, what feels like silence, can also feel very deafening. And you might be tempted to interpret such unanswered prayers as God's absence. God's forgotten you. Maybe you've experienced unjust suffering. Maybe you've been falsely accused by a friend. You've been consistently and repeatedly treated unfairly at work. And that's very difficult because you got to go 5 days a week, most of us. It's just constant unjust treatment. Or perhaps you felt repeated disappointment. One door after another closes on you. Relationships are in turmoil or they keep ending. Your efforts, towards whatever, don't seem to be bearing much fruit. And you wonder, has God forgotten me? Not, has his memory of me literally faded? No, of course his memory hasn't faded. You're asking, does God care? That's what you're asking, right? God, have you forgotten me? What you mean by that is, do you care that I'm suffering? Do I matter to you in the midst of my suffering? Or are you just going to let it continue? Genesis 40 and 41 picks up in the middle of this story of this guy named Joseph, who's been through a whole lot of unjust suffering, a whole lot of unanswered prayer, a whole lot of waiting, as we're going to see here, even in this passage. And these two chapters remind us of this truth. God remembers the forgotten. Specifically, his people who are forgotten. God remembers them. And this passage, these two chapters reminds us of that in three different ways. So we're going to follow kind of each scene and see how each scene reminds us that God remembers us when we are forgotten. Scene number one is this. How does God remember us when we're forgotten? He remembers his people when they are in the pit of suffering. Look at chapter 40, verse 1. If you're new to the Bible, the big numbers of the chapters, the little numbers of the verses. So I'm looking at the big number 40, verse 1. Chapter 40, verse 1. Sometime after this, so we're picking up ahead in the story. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against the Lord, their Lord, the king of Egypt. Sometime after this. After what? After Joseph was thrown in prison unjustly. He was falsely accused by this guy named Potiphar, who was a captain of the guard of Pharaoh of Egypt, falsely accused by his wife, Potiphar's wife, saying, Joseph raped me, is what she claimed. And he didn't. He was as pure as could be. And yet, her husband believed her enough to throw Joseph into prison. And so sometime after that, after he was thrown into prison, we don't know how long, he could have been in prison, some think as much as 10 years by this point, give or take. And as he's in prison, two men join him. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker of the most powerful person in the known world at that time, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. These two men committed some kind of offense against Pharaoh, which shows a contrast between them and Joseph. They did something deserving of being in prison. Joseph didn't deserve to be there. And their role in relation to the king was very important. We don't know what they did, but their role kind of gives us a hint perhaps into what they may have done. Their role as the guy who oversees Pharaoh's food and the guy who oversees Pharaoh's drink, they required full trust from Pharaoh. If he didn't trust them, they're thrown in prison. Do you know why? Because in that day, in the ancient Near East, how would someone betray a king? How would someone assassinate a king? Quite often it was through poison. And so these guys had the opportunity to try to poison the king if they didn't like him. And so he needed their full trust. They don't have his trust. Apparently they broke it for whatever reason, and they land up in prison. Look at verse 2. Verse 2, and Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. So they're in custody, meaning they're awaiting their sentence from Pharaoh. And they just so happened to land in the same prison as Joseph. Clearly another coincidence, right? We just see one coincidence after another in the book of Genesis. God isn't in control. This is all just chance, isn't it? I love the way that Moses is writing this story to show what looks like coincidence ain't no coincidence. God is governing all the events. They are in the same prison that Joseph was in. It makes you wonder, is something significant going to happen with these guys and Joseph? Look at verse 4. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. So they're awaiting their fate, and as they await their fate, something significant does happen. Verse 5. And one night, they both dreamed. The cupbearer and the chief baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell me." Okay, stop there real quick. In that day, dreams were given a lot of significance. In many ways, wrongly so. But these men are very disturbed by the dreams that they had, and they think these dreams demand some kind of interpretation as it relates to, do these dreams pertain to anything that's going to happen in my life? That's what they're feeling. And we got to be careful here. Don't read too much into your own dreams. That is not the way God primarily speaks to his people. He speaks to his people through the Bible, which is why we have it opened right here. We're looking at it. But in this situation, there was a way in which God was speaking and Joseph is interpreting. And he says, "Do not interpretations belong to God. Tell me the dreams." Look at verse 9. Here's the dream of the first guy. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. This is verse 9. And said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine before me. And on the vine, there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hands." Get the picture here. You have a grapevine with 3 shoots filled with these ripe, juicy grapes. Do you like grapes? I only like the green grapes. White grapes, green grapes, whatever. I don't like the other ones, but that's my preference. And I think my kids generally are the same way. When we grab one of those bags of grapes from H-E-B, like as soon as it gets home, they're washing it, hand it to them, and I look and it's gone. I see JJ like in the corner, like he's some king eating these grapes. And when they're really good, great, like mushy grapes are gross. But when they're really like plump, they like have a crunch and then a burst. This here is depicting that kind of imagery here, an imagery of abundance and flourishing and fruitfulness, right? It seems like the cupbearer's dream means something good is going to happen, especially when he's in the dream and Pharaoh's in the dream and he's squeezing these juicy grapes into Pharaoh's cup, kind of like he did before he was thrown into prison. What's going to happen? Verse 12. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The three branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly, when you were his cupbearer. It was very common in that day when a king would enter a room that everyone would bow. And when a king wanted to show favor to an individual, he would lift up their head by saying, please stand, and that person would then be allowed to approach the king. That's the imagery here. Pharaoh's going to lift up the head of the cupbearer, meaning he's going to show him honor. And so this is very good news for the cupbearer. No doubt he's beaming with great joy. And then Joseph asks one simple request. Verse 14. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. Now, there's a lot going on in that request. That word remember is the same word used again and again and again on the part of God when he's describing his intimate knowledge of and covenantal commitment to his people. God remembers his people. We've already seen this word used several times throughout Genesis. Chapter 8, verse 1, God remembered Noah. He remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock who were with him in the ark. Chapter 9, verse 15, God says, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you. Chapter 19, verse 29, God remembered Abraham. Chapter 30, verse 22, God remembered Rachel and opened her womb. God's remembering, once again, is not, oh, he literally forgot. The God of the universe has amnesia and he just slips his mind. It's like an older grandpa who just forgets stuff. Or like a pastor who's in his 40s and forgets a lot. Feeling it more and more these days. No, that's not what it's talking about. God's remembering is not, oh yeah, that's right. It's a way of describing his commitment to the promise he made to his people. His covenantal commitment to them. And that word, God remembered, that's used quite often in the Old Testament when God's people are immersed in suffering. When they are feeling it most, God says, I remember you. Think of Exodus chapter 2, verse 24. The people of Israel are suffering as slaves in Egypt. And it says this, God heard their groaning and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a word that describes God's personal, intimate knowledge of and commitment to his people, especially when it looks like he forgot them. No doubt, the people of Israel who read this story of Genesis would have resonated with Joseph in this word here, do me a favor and remember me. Remember, don't forget me. The people of Israel who read this felt forgotten for a long time when they were in slavery in Egypt. Joseph, in a kind of slavery here, saying, remember me. And he also says to the cupbearer, do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh. The word kindness is the same word used again and again in the Bible to describe God's steadfast love for his people. And that word mention me to Pharaoh, that's the same word as remember. Remember me to Pharaoh. This would have triggered for the people of Israel the experience of God's kindness and remembering of them when they were in slavery, as it should for you. Whatever you're in right now, this should trigger for you. God does remember. because he's kind to his people. Listen to what Joseph goes on to say, verse 15. So remember me, show me this kindness, because, verse 15, I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. That word stolen is a word associated with slavery. Joseph became a slave not because he was a prisoner of war, not because he needed to pay off some debt, as was common in that day. No, he was stolen. This was man-stealing. His own brothers sold him into slavery. And the Ishmaelites picked him up, and Potiphar bought him. He was stolen out of his own land. It was entirely unjust. That was unjust. And his current prison experience is unjust. He says, I've done nothing that they should throw me into the pit. Did you see that language he uses in verse 15? I've done nothing that they should put me into the pit. That's another interesting choice of words. The same word that was used for the literal pit that Joseph's brothers threw him into in chapter 37. And it's a word that is often used as a metaphor for death. Joseph is asking to be raised from the dead through the kindness of remembrance of this cupbearer, and he's not going to get it. The cupbearer, we're going to see, will forget, leaving us as readers to wonder, is God going to forget too? Has God forgotten Joseph? Does God forget his people? So Joseph gives this favorable news to the cupbearer. What about the chief baker? Look at verse 16. Verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. Now you can hear my tone in the way I read it, kind of interpretational. I think we're meant to read this as an exciting anticipatory tone. Chief cupbearer got a good news, and then I must be getting good news as well. Except the imagery here isn't quite the same. Birds eating out of a basket on his head. That's weird. Look at verse 18. And Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days, okay? So far, so good. Sounds just like the cupbearer. He's going to be released in 3 days. Verse 19, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head. Okay, again, sounds good. That's exactly what was said to the chief cupbearer. You will lift up your head, which was a metaphor for honor, but then it turns. Verse 19, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. His head's coming off. Some think this is referring to the jolt that happens when you get hanged, but this language actually could read that he was impaled by a pole. That's how Egyptians did it back then. And the birds will devour his dead carcass. Ooh, it is rough imagery. Not good news for this guy. I mean, we feel bad for him, but the way Moses is writing it is there's a hint of humor there. Like he's like, okay, great, let me hear this. And it's like, I'm going to be eaten by birds? And it turns really fast. And that would have been an Egyptian's worst nightmare, because Egyptians believed at that time that the way someone's body was handled after they die would be a reflection of what his afterlife would be. Right? That's why the Pharaoh's bodies were so well preserved, because they believed wrongly that that's going to reflect on how good his afterlife will be. And so you can see how devastating this news would be for the chief baker. And both dreams come true. Verse 20. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, He made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. Both heads lifted up mean very different things. Verse 21, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. One simple request, remember me. But he didn't. He forgot him. That word forgot is often used in the Bible to describe something that God never does to his people. He never forgets his people. Psalm 9 verse 12 says he does not forget the cry of the afflicted. Well, what about Joseph then? Looks like he's forgotten. How would you respond if you were in Joseph's position here? In those times in your life when it really feels like God has forgotten me, how do you respond? Self-pity? Sullenness? Sulking? The key is to remember that you only feel forgotten. You're not actually forgotten. God never forgets his people, even when it really feels like he has. You got to believe that. I mean, doesn't it look here like God forgot Joseph? He didn't know anything that was going on. He doesn't know what's going to take place. He doesn't know how this is unfolding. He's just rotten in prison. Surely he's human and would have been tempted to feel like God has forgotten me. And that's the time when you must fight to believe. God always remembers his people, even when, or should I say especially when, they're in the pit. He remembers you in your suffering, even when it feels like he doesn't. How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, this takes us to the second part of this passage. And the second way in which God remembers his people, number 2, God raises his people from the pit. He raises his people from the pit. Look at chapter 41, verse 1. Chapter 41, verse 1. After 2 whole years, stop there. 2 whole years, nothing has changed. 2 years! Joseph is still in prison. Would you start to lose a little hope? Verse 1, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. I would too. What is going on? What does this even mean? Clearly an odd dream that would have freaked out Pharaoh especially. Do you know why? Do you know why this dream would have freaked Pharaoh out? It would have freaked him out because his dream includes some of the specific strengths of Egypt. The things that Egypt shows off, look who we are. The things that give Egypt power even, like the Nile River. That lush river that produced so much life and abundance all around. And then here as well, healthy cattle, these plump cows. That's a sign of life. And it's quite shocking when some ugly, thin cows also come up out from the Nile. So the idea, the picture here is that these cows were like going down to the Nile River to be replenished and refreshed. And that's why they're so fat and plump, because the Nile gives that to them. But wait a minute. You got these other cows that were down there by the Nile, and they come up out and they're ugly and thin and bony. You can see their rib cage. What is going on here? It makes you wonder, is something going to happen to the Nile River? Is it going to stop nourishing life? Why do these thin cows eat the plump cows? And it just gets weirder. Look at verse 5. Verse 5. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. Let me just say there, the east wind was a known wind at that time that caused crops to die, so showing the historicity of the book of Genesis. Verse 7, and the thin ears swallowed up the plump full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So this dream now attacks the agricultural life of Egypt, first showing the abundance of agriculture with these 7 ears of grain, like wheat. You ever seen a wheat grain? Usually one with just, one stalk with one ear on there, but this one has 7 ears on one stalk, showing a phenomenon that just doesn't happen, but it's an imagery of great abundance. But even more unusual is these messed up pieces of grain eat. They start eating. You know it's a dream when this happens. They start eating the plump grain. Really, these dreams really would have bothered Pharaoh, because you have these images of the Nile, of cows, and now of grain that show forth the strength of Egypt. But not only that, these 3 images were associated with the gods of Egypt. Do you know that? There was even one Egyptian goddess named Hathor who was a cow. We'll just leave it at that. That's just an odd thing to worship. But all of Pharaoh's sense of security is being shattered in these dreams. Our greatest strengths associated with our gods are kind of being overturned here. How do you think he feels when he wakes up? Look at verse 8. Verse 8, so in the morning, his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Now, interestingly, that last sentence there literally reads, Pharaoh told them his dream, singular, but there was none who could interpret them, plural. Pharaoh told them his dream, indicating Pharaoh seems to think these dreams are really just one. But these guys seem to think they're 2 separate dreams, and that probably leads us to realize that Pharaoh's unsatisfied with their interpretation. If he can easily tell, these dreams are talking about the same thing, you guys don't even realize that, who are you? You professional dream interpreters. That's who the magicians were. And these wise men, supposed to be masters on any given subject, they could not interpret these dreams because probably they wrongly thought, this is talking about 2 separate things. So Pharaoh's heart is unsettled. And guess who catches wind of this? Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember, there's that word again, I remember my offenses today. I remember my offense. I remember now. Took you long, that's 2 years. Verse 10. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Now you notice he seems to be giving Joseph all the credit for this dream interpretation. And Pharaoh buys into it. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. the way that sentence reads it's pretty fast. I mean, he was in the pit, forgotten for 2 years. Prior to that, could have been 10 years. And all of a sudden, in a matter of moments, he's out. Quickly get him out. And they give him a nice, good, clean shave, which probably would have not only included his beard, but his head. Because Egyptians really valued clean shavenness. And so that he's looking like one now. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. Notice the singular there. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. The original language there is really just 2 words. Not me, God. Not me, God will give the right interpretation. He wants no credit for himself. Joseph here is demonstrating his confidence that God will provide a right interpretation, and God's interpretation will happen, which shows Joseph's faith here. Joseph believes that God's going to do this. And he goes on to tell him. Verse 17, Pharaoh kind of re-explains the dream. Verse 17, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. That's interesting. I've never seen anything like this. Why? Because Egypt is always so lush and abundant. And now these ugly cows, never seen anything like it. Verse 20. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as at the beginning. Now that's an addition, another comment. They didn't get fat after they ate the fat cows. They stayed really thin. What is going on here? Something is wrong. He says, then I awoke. Verse 22, I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Joseph then gives no hesitation to his interpretation of this dream. Look at verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Now catch this. Pharaoh's dreams are talking about the same event that's going to happen, and Joseph says this event is what God is going to do. What's God going to do? Verse 26. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after the 7 years, are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. Okay, get this. Joseph is saying this is what God is about to do. God is going to provide 7 years of abundance, and God is going to bring 7 years of famine. You may know this, but this is a good reminder. Do you know that God is totally in control of nature? Anything that happens out there, God is ultimately in control. In control when the land is plentiful. God is in control when the land is famished. He's in control as well of the precise timing of these things as well. 7 years each. In this dream, God, in his kindness, is pulling back the curtain of his providence to show Pharaoh what's to come in the next 14 years. Look at verse 29. Verse 29. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, There will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in all the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And notice this, verse 32. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. You're not getting out of this, Pharaoh. There's no way of maneuvering around this one, most powerful person in the world. This is fixed. It's going to happen. Why? This doubling of dreams kind of functions like two witnesses to an event. It's going to happen. And interestingly, dreams so far in the life of Joseph have been in twos. You notice this? 13 years prior, Joseph had dreams. One dream that was doubled. The dream that his brothers and his family would one day bow down to him and he would rule over them. But those dreams, what would that have been? 12 years before? Those dreams, 13 years before, those dreams have yet to be fulfilled. And yet Joseph here is saying with great confidence to Pharaoh, your dreams are doubled, it's going to happen. Joseph's dreams were doubled. Does he believe it's going to happen? I think this is a statement of great faith. Joseph knows God will complete his plan, especially in light of all that he's been through. And so what should Pharaoh do? This is going to happen. What should Pharaoh do? Notice, Joseph boldly offers the greatest, most powerful man in the world a little bit of counsel. Look at verse 33. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for the good in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. So it's a good plan here. Do you notice what his plan is? It's a threefold plan. Number one, you need to appoint a person to oversee all of this, who will then be overseeing several overseers who can execute that plan. That's part 2 of Joseph's suggestion. And then lastly, you need to tax the people. Instead of 10%, you need to tax them 20% during the 7 years of abundance, which probably wouldn't have felt too harsh on the people because it was abundance after all. But it was for their good later on so that they could have plenty to store up for the time of famine. Good plan, yet Joseph offered this suggestion unsolicited to the greatest, most powerful person in the world. You think Pharaoh might say, "How dare you speak so boldly to me, young man?" That's not what he says. Verse 37, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Yeah, you're looking right at him, Pharaoh. It's Joseph. He's right there. And Pharaoh notices it. Verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are." Now that would have been a major knock on all those wise men and magicians who couldn't interpret the dream. Pharaoh, or Joseph, you're wiser than all the wisest in Egypt. Verse 40. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. That is amazing. In a matter of just maybe a few hours, Joseph went from being in the pit to becoming the second most powerful person in the known world. Get this. Never forget this. God's timing is always right. Always. Imagine if the cupbearer had remembered Joseph when Joseph asked him to. It would have been well before those dreams that Pharaoh had. And Joseph may have been unable or not around to interpret these dreams, or could have been dead by that point. It would have been 2 years too soon. Therefore, it is good to remember God's timing is always right. Verse 41. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. Now, this signet ring would have given Joseph authority to validate decrees and documents on behalf of the king's order. And notice he's given these royal garments. If you've been with us in Genesis, that word garment should trigger something for you. Garments have played a very important role in the life of Joseph, and not for his good, seemingly. The word garment was used in chapter 39 6 times to describe that piece of false evidence that Potiphar's wife used against Joseph. And now Joseph is putting on new royal garments, showing his change from a slave to now a prince. Verse 43. And he made him, Pharaoh made Joseph, ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, "Bow the knee." And thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift a hand or a foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah. And he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Now, this Egyptian name that Pharaoh gives him is not the name that Joseph continues to go by, but it would provide Joseph some authority as he travels about the whole land, preparing for this coming famine. And the principle here that we draw from this second scene is simple. God will not leave his people in the pit forever. He will raise them out. He will eventually, because God does not forget his people. God remembers them. Listen, you are not forgotten by God. What's the pit you're in? What are you going through? What's really affecting you right now? Remember, you're not forgotten by God, no matter how much you feel like you are. You are not. God raises his people from the pit always, eventually. And that takes us to the last scene, number 3, and the third way in which God remembers his people is this: God's salvation from the pit extends to all peoples. Look at verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the house of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Mark that. He was 17 when he showed up in Egypt. 13 years. One person said, God's providence is utterly sovereign, but it in no way is in a hurry to accomplish its divine purposes. God's totally in control, but he's not in a hurry to give you what you're looking for. We got to wait. We got to trust. We got to be patient. Verse 46, second part of verse 46. It says, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and put the food in the cities. And he put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. So he's doing exactly what he said should be done in the time of fruitfulness. And even Joseph himself during this time experiences some fruitfulness. Look at verse 50. Before the year of the famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God has made me forget all the hardships in all my father's house. The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So Manasseh sounds like the word forget. Ephraim sounds like the word fruitful. Interestingly, those two names that Joseph gives to his sons are not Egyptian names. They are Hebrew names, showing Joseph still believes there's going to be a connection to his family at some point. And then comes the famine, verse 53. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. And as Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says, do. Now you notice in those verses, famine is not just in the land of Egypt. It is spreading to all the surrounding lands. So Egypt becomes the place where all the surrounding peoples and nations flock to for food. Verse 56. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain, because the famine was so severe over all the earth. Do you see? It was through Joseph's providential rise from the pit to the place of power that salvation extends to all peoples of the earth. And who do you think is going to travel to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy food? Joseph's brothers who sold him there in the first place. 300 miles away, who all those years ago laughed at the prospect of Joseph ruling over them. Listen, God's plan will prevail, even if it takes longer than we expect. God was entirely in charge of Joseph's plight from the pit to a place of power, and that pattern occurs throughout the storyline of the Bible. God remembers his people in the pit, and he raises them up out of the pit. And through that resurrection, salvation extends to all peoples on the earth. This is what happens in the book of Exodus. They're in the pit as slaves in Egypt, but God raises them from the pit in Egypt. And through such deliverance from the pit, God tells them through Moses, you're going to be a blessing to all peoples of the earth. How did that happen? How did the people of Israel, that blessing, come to all peoples of the earth? Well, it happened when the true Israelite came to this earth. The one who went down into the pit of death, that grave, for 3 days. And as we read earlier from Acts chapter 2, God remembered him, and God would not let him see the corruption found in the pit. So God loosed the pangs of death from him and raised him from the pit. And that resurrection from the pit means salvation for all peoples. Jesus Christ is the one raised from the pit. Why? So that you would never be forgotten in the pit. Do you realize that? Amen. Who said that? Praise the Lord. Amen. Thank you, Rory. Someone's listening. Appreciate you, Rory. It's true. I mean, Jesus Christ was raised from the pit so you wouldn't be forgotten there. That's why you can be so confident, Christian. Why did Jesus come? Jesus came to live the life we couldn't live and die the death we deserve to die. We deserve the pit. Sometimes when we're in suffering and we're experiencing so much trouble and anguish, we're like, I don't deserve this. No, actually, we deserve way worse. Because we're sinners who have sinned against a holy God who cannot overlook wrongdoing. He must punish it, but God is so kind, and he remembers his people. to such a degree that he sent his Son to go to the pit for them and to rise from that pit, conquering sin and death for anyone who would look to him and trust in him alone. So would you do that today? Maybe you're not a Christian yet. If you're not yet a Christian, we'd love to have this conversation with you. What does it mean to have hope of a resurrection? What does it mean to be a Christian? The only way God could forget his people, the only way God could forget you is if he forgot Jesus in the tomb. But Acts chapter 2 says it was not possible for Jesus to be held by the pangs of death. So too, it is not possible for God to forget you. Remember that when you're in the pit. Some of you are right now. You feel the loneliness of singleness. You feel the weight of relational conflict. You feel the uncertainty of financial instability. You feel the loss of comfort in good health. You feel the struggle of abandonment by friends. You feel like you're in the pit and it feels like God has forgotten you. Remember, do not forget, what you feel isn't always true. God cannot forget you. Cling to that truth. Remember the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Remember that he cannot forget you. He will always remember you. He will always bring you out of the pit, eventually. Amen.